Welcome back to my channel. My name is Tati, and today we are going to be talking about every book that I read in the month of October. I just put together my monthly spread or fable wrap-up, and I read 8 books in October, which is pretty good for me lately. I had a really slow beginning of the year, so I'll put this on the screen, but this is what we're looking at today to go through. The first book I read was actually a nonfiction book. It was called Space Oddities by Harry Cliff. Every year or so, I get an itch to read some science books, specifically about like astrophysics and space and the cosmos, and this was the first time I actually read a book by a particle physicist, at least that I'm aware of. While it was very tied to astrophysics and the cosmos and the universe and how everything works, it was talking about how some of the best discoveries in science are not aha moments of like, ooh, I'm gonna test this and I proved it right. They're actually anomalies where you're looking for one thing and then some fluke in the data, some weird thing happens where you're like, what is that? And then as you start to uncover that anomaly, you learn something new. So it talks about historical anomalies that have led to discoveries, scientific discoveries, but it also talked about very modern anomalies. This was published in, I want to say it was like 2022, 2023. I'll have to look. But some of the anomalies turned out to be nothing that in the book they're not resolved, but I googled them later and there were no discoveries that came out of it. So it is pretty current, but still dated. I mean, that's science to a T, but I rated that 4.25 stars. I really adored that book. Harry Cliff does a wonderful job of making the science very accessible and understandable, and he tells the stories of the anomalies like they are stories, so it's very entertaining and it wasn't very slow or too dense. So I highly recommend that if you are interested in space, science, or a nonfiction book in general. I don't remember exactly what I read next, but I want to say it was The Briar Club by Kate Quinn. That was the book we read in my book club that I'm in. It was our September pick, but I apparently was very delayed and didn't finish it until early October, but that is okay. I unfortunately only rated that 2.75 stars. I do like historical fiction. I say that with almost like a question mark because it's been a long time since I've enjoyed an historical fiction, but this book is told from multiple POVs, and without spoiling anything, it is just about a group of women living in their renting their boarders in this house, and their personal stories and kind of how they all tie together at the end, and how they're all tied together by kind of one woman in particular who brought them together, and their secrets and their dramas and all of that. But I don't know, it just felt like I was starting a new book every like 50 pages, and some of the women were definitely interesting and I liked their characterization. It was very well written, but I was just kind of bored and I kept wanting to know what's the point? What's the point? There is a subplot that is tied together in between chapters, but it still wasn't doing it for me. The next book I read was The Night Guest by Hildur Knutsdotter. I butchered that. I believe it was Swedish or Norwegian, I can't remember now. But this was a very short, snappy horror book about this woman who, when she goes to sleep at night, oh man, how to not spoil it. I'm going to be very careful about what I say actually. She just keeps waking up exhausted and sometimes injured, and she has no clue what's going on, and doctors aren't really doing anything about it, so she takes matters into her own hands to figure out what is going on with her, and it just turns into this loopy, crazy horror story. It is horrific. Trigger warnings, there is some animal abuse, there is murders, it was gory, so it's not for the faint of heart, but if you are a horror reader, in hindsight, the more you think about this book, it's the kind of book where the more you think about it, the more plot holes it has, but it was so entertaining. I read it in practically one sitting. It was very short. I had it from the library, and I just ate that book up. So I rated that 3.75 stars. I think it was some of the plot holes that kind of downgraded it for me. In fact, I think I originally rated it 4 stars and then decided to downgrade it slightly. So 3.75 stars for that one, but oh, it was fun. So I do recommend that. So the book I read after that was another horror, it was also gory. It is The Drift by C.J. Tudor. I read a book by this author earlier this year. I read The Gathering, which is a story about some vampires in Alaska, which I was like super excited to read. I think I read that in January this year, so it was still winter, and that felt just perfect. And this is another wintry book for sure. I think that might be like this author's thing. I'm not sure. This book is written from 3 different point of views in 3 different plot lines, and usually I'm not a huge fan of different POVs and switching plot lines, but this one wasn't that short. I can't remember the page count, but I couldn't put this book down. It took me a day or 2 to read because it was a bit longer, but I was just so invested in all of the storylines. And it was one of those things where the more I read, the more interested I was. Sometimes characters and stories kind of taper off for me. This one was just snappy all the way through, and it was one of those where the twist I didn't feel like was that hard to guess, but you feel so good about yourself when you figure it out, and then when you know you're right, it was just, so I was able to figure out the twist, and I just really enjoyed this book. So I rated this one 3.5 stars. I'm realizing that I rate things a lot lower than what I actually think about them, but I do think that one had some plot holes too and had some problems with it, but the entertainment factor was through the roof for me, so I really did enjoy that. After The Drift, I read I'll Be Waiting by Kelly Armstrong. I have read one other book by this author before. I believe it's on the shelf somewhere behind me. There it is. It is Hemlock Island. I kind of don't remember that book, but I remember enjoying it. So I picked up this book. It is about this lady whose husband tragically passes away in my dog is playing with her toys. Her husband tragically passes away in a car accident, and his last thing he ever says to her is, "I'll be waiting." So it's kind of ominous of like, oh. And so she starts going to these seances trying to contact her dead husband, but she is a skeptic. But then they go to this house where she used to vacation with her husband, and things start to happen. And it is a good ghost story. It's a good haunting story. I love those slow burn ghost stories where like doors are moving on their own and you hear footsteps in the hallway and just that eerie, creepy, spooky ghost haunting vibe. I love that. Love that, love that, love that. So this had that. It had that through the roof, but it was kind of slow. I was a little disappointed in this book. It felt way too long. I feel like if it had been shorter and really locked into what it was doing, I would have enjoyed it more. I rated I'll Be Waiting by Kelly Armstrong 3 stars. So I liked it for sure, but it's kind of on the verge of like, could have been better. All right, after I'll Be Waiting, I believe, yes, this is when I decided to pick up a book for my flight. So I decided I really wanted to read Clockwork Orange. I've been putting it off for so long. And I started reading on the airplane and a little bit at the beginning of my trip. And you know what? We don't even need to spend time on this book because I already spent... I think she's licking my books right now. Okay. Well, I don't need to spend any more time on A Clockwork Orange than I have already spent, because that book was awful. It is written in a made-up language that's like a mix between English and Russian, I think, and other stuff. And oh my gosh. Okay, so I did about a third into the book, I started to like understand the language. Like it wasn't an understanding issue, but it was so boring and it was so pointless and it was so graphically disturbing for no reason. And yes, I know there's a reason. Like it, can I just say, I read the author's note and he doesn't even really like that book. So you know what, for everyone who's like commenting on my Fable review, because I rated it 0.25 stars, like 0 if I could, and I'm getting comments of like, would it elaborate, like explain. I don't have to explain myself. I'm explaining myself here, and I didn't like it. I thought it was boring and fruitless and pointless and graphic for no reason and shock value, and the author didn't even like it. So I didn't like it, and that story's over. Thank you very much. We don't need to spend more time on it. While I was there, I went to a little small bookstore. I believe it's a woman-owned small bookstore, and I picked up Mate by Ali Hazelwood, which I do have a copy of right here. I wanted to get this, and I wanted to get it in hard copy because I have Bride, and I loved Bride. I read Bride last year. You know, it's a werewolf, vampire, romance, marriage of convenience. Those are the tropes, and I ate this up. It was the right book at the right time last year. It was like, entertainment wise, 5 stars easily. So I had high hopes for Mate. Unfortunately, it did not live up to its predecessor. I rated this, oof, I'm sorry. I rated this 2.5 stars. Number one, I thought it was slow. I thought it was kind of boring. And worst of all, the male romance. It was Grumpy Sunshine trope, but the male love interest spent half the book being the biggest a-hole in the universe. And it wasn't, so it's like supposed to be like enemies to lovers. I don't know, but they weren't true enemies. And I can sometimes enjoy a Grumpy Sunshine where the guy is kind of rude, I guess. Not really, I don't really like that. But he was like extra. He was so extra rude, and we just, no way. We've all dated enough awful men in our lives, or women in our lives. We all have enough horrible exes to not want to read about bullying our crushes. No thank you. So anyways, I did like the ending. I thought the ending was done well, but so much of this was just a flop for me. So I'm sorry, Ali Hazelwood. If you write another one, I will read it, but I hope it's better. After I finished Mate and I got home, I went to the library and I picked up Graveyard Shift by M.L. Rio. I will not describe the plot very much because I talked about that in my last video, but this book, I read this in one sitting, maybe 2 sittings, but I read it in one day, and it was very, I wouldn't say it was like a page turner per se. I wasn't sitting there in one sitting reading it because it was that amazing, but it was very readable, very accessible, very great gothic, eerie, dark academia vibes. Like, it was good. I really enjoyed this. I appreciated how short it was. You know, for being a novella, this was so well done. Novellas, I always complain, have horrible characters in them because they're too short for you to really get a grasp on anything. And there are 5 characters in here, all with their own point of views, and they were all really well done. So I have still not read If We Were Villains, but I think If We Were Villains is going to be on my list of 10 before the end because of Graveyard Shift. So, we have one more book to review. I did not grab the physical copy. I do have it, but I talked about it in my last video also, and that is Pumpkinheads by Rainbow Rowell. and it is a graphic novel, and it is just a cutesy little Halloween book about these two seniors in high school before they go off to college, doing all the things they were going to do in their like pumpkin farm job they do every year. So anyways, I had read it before. It was 5 stars. I don't know if I liked it as much the second read through, but it's still 5 stars. It's just a beautiful book. The artwork's beautiful. It's very short, quick, so I read it on Halloween day and I read it in under an hour. I ended my last video saying we'll see if it's one that I do think I should read every Halloween, and you know, I think every few years would be sufficient for that book, but it is gorgeous, beautiful, cozy, Halloweeny, all of those things, so it was great. With that said, that wraps up the 8 books I read this October. We have lots ahead, and I am just so excited to keep reading and telling you guys what I think about what I've read. So have a great weekend, and I will see you all on the next one.